Hare Krishna, Dandavat Jai Shri Prabhupada. Can you hear me?
Nice and clear. Set my respective obeisances. Vancha kalpatarubhyasya kripa sindhubhyo vacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Thank you, Prabhu. It's a great fortune to have you. You can...
Okay, so are we ready to begin? I cannot hear you.
Able to hear?
Okay, now I can hear you.
You can start.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we're ready to begin. First of all, Vansha kalpatarubhyasya kripa sindhubhyo vacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. We are discussing the essence of the Bhagavad-Gita and lessons to be learned from it as per the request of our host. And we'll try to mention a few things that may be gleaned from this great text. It's very hard to really condense an adequate glorification of Bhagavad-Gita into just an hour, but we will say what we can. Now, we've just recently celebrated Gita Jayanti, also known as Mokshada Ekadashi or Vaikuntha Ekadashi. And you have been hearing other speakers explain specific sections of the Bhagavad Gita. So I've been asked to explain lessons to be gleaned from the entirety of the Bhagavad Gita. I haven't heard the previous presenters, so please pardon me if there's anything that I say which seems disconnected from what you've heard before. But I did want to mention that one specialty of Bhagavad Gita is that it's universal. Not only that it's a universal scripture in the sense that it's applicable to everyone, because it deals with time, and it deals with action, and it deals with these 5 factors which Baladev Vidyabhushan has listed in his commentary on Bhagavad Gita. These are things that everybody deals with. And it doesn't really matter whether you're a Hindu or not, or whether you're even religious or not. Everybody's dealing with karma, and everybody's dealing with God in one way or another. And everybody's dealing with time, and et cetera, et cetera. So, Bhagavad Gita is universal, and it's famously been declared at least twice in Mahabharata, yat ihasti yat tad anyatra yanne hasti natvat kvachita, natat kvachita. That means that whatever is in the Mahabharata, whatever you have heard anywhere else, whatever exists elsewhere, that will be in Mahabharata. And whatever does not exist in Mahabharata, it does not exist anywhere else. So as we know, Bhagavad Gita is one chapter of Mahabharata, but it's a very, very important chapter. And for that reason, it's sometimes even equated with the Shruti mantras. So let us first of all begin with short Mangalacharana, and then we can try to speak a few words in glorification of Bhagavad Gita and speak some things that can be learned from Bhagavad Gita, some of the things only. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yuta Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Anandalilamaya Vigrahaya Ema Bhadivyachhavi Sundaraya Tasmai Mahaprema Rasapradaya Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Vansha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Madgavirapi Gopala Swikuryat Kripaya Yadi Tadaiva Sambhaya Pitva Risheyustvat Priyajanaha. So Bhagavad-Gita as it is, let us make that very clear. At the outset, we have any idea practically of Bhagavad-Gita only by the divine grace of Srila Prabhupada, his divine grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. I myself read many editions of Bhagavad-Gita in English before I came across Bhagavad-Gita as it is. And I have to admit, honestly, I could not understand what they were saying. The most likely reason for that is that the persons who published those Bhagavad-Gitas also didn't understand what it was saying. But Srila Prabhupada has presented Bhagavad-Gita yatharupa, as we say in Hindi, as it is, the real Bhagavad-Gita, because he has presented this knowledge, evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu ityadi, as Krishna explains himself in chapter 4. That is Srila Prabhupada's qualification. I don't know what our qualification is, except that somehow or other, by some inconceivable good fortune, we all came across Srila Prabhupada and got any clue as to what Bhagavad Gita means. So let us first of all begin by offering our respectful obeisances unto his divine lotus feet. So Bhagavad Gita is an encyclopedia of all kinds of knowledge. Information, examples are there, ideals are there, lessons regarding all facets of human existence and experience. Social life, religion, culture, science, politics, economics, environment, biology. All these things are there, at least in some form, in Bhagavad Gita. And whatever is not elaborated by its commentaries, written by so many merciful acharyas, such as Srila Prabhupada and his predecessors, we will find elsewhere, as we've already described in Mahabharata, Srimad Bhagavatam, and other such literature. So, in fact, devotional service subsumes everything. That's why it is so universal. That's why it's so relevant in all times, all places, and circumstances for all persons. It is relevant because devotional service does subsume everything. And that's exactly what Krishna has asked for in chapter 9, text 27. Yad koroshi, yad ashnasi, yad johoshi, dadasi yat, Yatapasyasi kaunteya tat kurshva mad arpanam. Make it an offering unto me. Anyone can do this. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yome bhaktya prayachati. Another from the same chapter. Krishna says, even if you only have a little water, some fruit, flour, something, kuch bhi, you can offer it unto me. And then our devotional creeper begins, our devotional service begins. But we find that as soon as we begin this process, it starts to expand. And Krishna also elaborates, he's already mentioned in chapter 5, text 17, tad buddhayas tadatmanas nisthastat parayanaha gachantyam apunarda vrittim jnana nirdhuda kalmashaha. Those devotees whose intelligence is fixed on me, their minds are fixed on me, their faith and their refuge are all fixed in me. They become fully cleansed of all misgivings through complete knowledge, and they proceed straight back to Godhead. Very simply. It's simple for the simple. So many of the verses also in Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna has said this. Bhagavad-Gita is celebrated all over the world because out of all the subsections of the Mahabharata, and maybe even out of all the Vedic scriptures, the Bhagavad-Gita most succinctly ties everything together under this one principle, pure devotional service. That's something that Srila Prabhupada, this phrase, well, there's a few of them actually. These are shibboleths of Srila Prabhupada. For example, pure devotional service, that's very clear. Transcendental loving service is another one. What else does he say? In so many ways that Srila Prabhupada translates bhakti, its essence is very clear. Usually when we hear the phrase bhakti, people will say it means what? Devotion. Simple term. What is devotion? That we don't know. But Srila Prabhupada makes it very clear. First of all, it has to be transcendental. Secondly, it has to be imbued with feeling. Transcendental, loving, service. And service implies, the word service means you've got to do something practical. And Srila Prabhupada's life was the illustration of this translation. He lived what he taught. He exemplified. He taught by his example. This is the function of an acharya, actually. So, pure devotional service, putting this supreme ideal and eternal constitution into practical terms that every one of us can understand. Krishna simply instructs in Bhagavad Gita. Twice he instructs it. Once he instructs in chapter 9, text 34, the conclusion of that chapter, the very last verse. Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi utvaivam atmanam matparayanaham. Engage your mind always in thinking of me. Become my devotee. Offer obeisances to me and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. And then again at the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 18, texts 63 to 66, he says, thus, after going through everything in Bhagavad Gita, he says, thus I've explained to you knowledge and still more confidential. Deliberate on this fully, and then do what you wish to do. Yatechasi tathakuru. He doesn't force, but he has explained everything. He's put all the cards are on the table, and he's given the option. This is love, after all. It's not robotics. If it was AI, all he would have to do is pre-program us to do whatever he wants, but he doesn't want that. What does he want? He wants real love. That's reality. He wants genuine love. In Japan, in case you don't know this, the Japanese are not only fond of photography, perhaps more than anyone else in the world, but they're also very fond of robots. And if you're a busy salaryman in Japan, you can actually buy a robot and you can list all your preferences exactly the way that you want that robot to behave and interact with you. And you will have no negative experience from your robot. Why? Because it's a robot. It's not a him or a her. This is the problem. So Krishna is not really looking for that. And we're also not looking for that, are we? Would you be happy to live with robot spouse and robot children for the rest of your life, and the whole world is full of other robots? We're not like that. We're persons, and we're eternal persons. That frightens some people. If you want to know more about this, you can read chapter 4, text number 10, and read that purport a few times, because Srila Prabhupada has really hit the nail on the head there. Chapter 4, text 10. Vitaraga bhayakrotha manmaya mam upashrataha bahavo jnanatapasa putamad bhavamagataha. Persons who have been purified of three things, Krishna says, they can approach me. What are the three things? Raga and bhaya and krodha, attachment, fear, and anger. Manmayamam upashrata bahavo jnanatapasa. They have been many in the past, he says, have become purified by the austerity of knowledge. Puta means purified. And what happens then? Bhavam agataha. They have approached me with love. Bhava bhakti. If you want bhava bhakti, Krishna is telling us way back in chapter 4, but he's only hinting at that point. Why is he only hinting? Because according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, if we have time, we will read his summary of Bhagavad-Gita. He says Bhagavad-Gita is like a jewel box. Ratna Jatita Mani Manjusha, we might say. The whole thing is encrusted with jewels. It's made out of golden box, full of jewels also. The top lid is like the introductory, that's called Sambandha Gyan. You are not your body. You have to act in a pious way to understand this. You have to learn how to dedicate yourself selflessly, and you have to make advancement in spiritual life. These things, concentrating your mind on God, these things are discussed in the early chapters of Bhagavad-Gita, chapters 1 through 6. It's considered to be the lid on that jewel box. The base of the jewel box, I mean the box itself, that is the last 6 chapters of Bhagavad-Gita, from chapter 13 to chapter 18, which deals with details, applicational sorts of considerations. The 3 modes of material nature, the nature of this material world, the nature of individuals, divine and demoniac. How do we deal with our faith? How important is faith? To begin with, what kinds of faith? You are your faith, he says. Shraddhamayo yam purushaha in chapter 17. And finally, he talks about what does it mean to be really surrendered or renounced. That's chapter 18. But the real message of Bhagavad-Gita, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, is neither the box nor the lid of the box, but the content. And that content is chapters 7 through 12. The real essence of the Bhagavad-Gita is given in those chapters. And out of those chapters, probably the most important is chapter 9. You wouldn't think so. Many people don't think so. Impersonalists and non-devotees generally, they're impressed with a big show. And so they consider the climax of Bhagavad-Gita was Lord Krishna's revelation of the universal form before Arjuna. That they consider to be the most fireworks in chapter 11. So they consider that's the most impressive part. They can't hear the subtlety of the middle chapters, especially chapter 9. They cannot appreciate because their hearts are not yet sufficiently puta, purified. So they don't appreciate the depth and the worth of the jewels inside of that chapter in particular. But we've already quoted Manmana bhava madbhakto. That is the conclusion of chapter 9. And then again, at the end of the Bhagavad-Gita, 63 through 66, he says, thus I've explained to you knowledge still more confidential. Deliberate on this fully and then do what you wish to do. Let's continue. Because you're my very dear friend, the next verse, I'm speaking to you my supreme instruction, the most confidential knowledge of all. This is way at the end now. If you're hearing the same idea that was discussed in chapter 9, the most confidential knowledge. He's repeating himself here. Hear this from me, for it is for your benefit. When you love someone, when you have a close friend about whom you care, ordinary friend, he's called mitra. But suhrit is somebody that you really care about at heart. There's that Kabir bhajan. He says, what is it? Sab paise ke bhai. Everybody's just about money in this world. Have you noticed? Dilika jani na koi. Something like that, he says. Nobody's really with you at heart. Dilika satana hi koi. Nobody really cares. But suhrit means somebody who's really close to you. Arjun and Krishna were very close in this way. And for this reason, Krishna says in chapter 18, text 64, for this reason, Arjun, I'm telling you this thing. Listen closely. This is my most supreme instruction out of all of those that have gone before. And he says it again. The same thing that he said at the end of chapter 9, exactly the same thing. Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi satyam te pratajane priyosi me. He just changes the last couple of lines only. Always think of me. Become my devotee. Worship me and offer your homage unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are my very dear friend. You can trust someone who is your very dear friend. You can trust what he says. You know that he's not going to mislead you. He's thinking about you. And then just to elaborate, in case we can't understand what is the purport of these four simple things, thinking about Krishna, becoming a devotee, bowing down and offering obeisances, Krishna says, look, here's what it's all about. Next verse. Sarva dharman parityajamamekam sharanam vraja. Bas. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Don't fear. Aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shucha. This is the supreme conclusion of the Bhagavad-Gita. And it's therefore well protected, we can say, within that jewel box of the Gita the Gita in general. The really confidential essences in the middle 6 chapters, and especially in the middle of the middle 6 chapters. What is the middle of 6? 3. So 3 chapters into that middle section, you get this chapter 9, in which Krishna concludes with this particular verse, Manmana. Once in Atlanta, the entire Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan party had come to visit Srila Prabhupada. And these were young men in their early 20s. I was not even in my 20s yet. I was a teenager at that time. And they very enthusiastically asked Srila Prabhupada, what service pleases you the most? They really wanted Prabhupada to confirm their conviction that book distribution is the most important service. And I will not deny that, because after all, we're in late December. We're in the peak season of book distribution in the Krishna conscious year, what we call the Srila Prabhupada Marathon. And we're coming into the final stretch of that marathon. So we should certainly encourage book distribution by all means. But that wasn't what Srila Prabhupada said. What did he say instead? When asked, what is the service that pleases you most? He said, when you love Krishna. Love Krishna. Again, we don't want to be robots. Krishna does not require that. He could have programmed us himself. He's much better at that than anybody in Silicon Valley. So, this is what we have to give Krishna. And this is what he asks for twice, as we've just heard. Okay, that's my contribution to this this evening's discussion on Bhagavad-Gita. But Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has given, in his own chapter summaries, some idea of what he considers the important content. I'm quoting from him because he's one of the most respected commentators in our entire line. And we don't hear so much of what he has to say because Srila Prabhupada didn't translate his commentaries verbatim. So, Gauram Shukahasat Kumuda Pramodi Swabhikyaya Gostamaso Nihanta Shri Krishna Chaitanya Sudhanidhirme Manodhitishtan Swaratim Kurotu. May the ocean of nectar Shri Krishna Chaitanya, also he's like a sun which emanates golden rays, giving joy to the white water lilies of the saintly devotees, and who destroys the darkness of this earth by his splendor. May he be present in my mind and bestow upon me attraction for himself. This is his prayer in the beginning of his commentary. He says, the son of Vasudev, Parabrahman in human form, the original Bhagavan, whose lotus feet are desired by all the scriptures of the world, descended directly in Mathura, and most inconceivably became visible to the eyes of all people of the material world, thereby delivering the people of the world who were drowning in the ocean of material life, submerging them instead in the great ocean of his own prema. What is that called in Rupa Goswami's language? Bhakti Rasa Amrita Sindhu. Right now we are drowning in the Bhava Sindhu. And in the fourth canto purport, those who read Srila Prabhupada's books every day enthusiastically, you may recognize, Srila Prabhupada said the ocean of material suffering is comprised of all the tears of those persons in this world who are suffering intensely. So many people suffering for so many reasons. You might be trafficked if you're a young girl in Uttar Pradesh. You might be trafficked for the organ harvesting industry, a multi-million-dollar industry. A very heroic-looking boy comes along and professes to love you from his dil se, as we mentioned already, and you fall for that and you decide to elope for him. But then the night after he enjoys you, then he slits your neck, and the men with the body bags move in and they cut out all your organs and they send them, who knows where they send them, but they get a lot of money for it. This happens. And what do you think the girl thought in her dying moments? What about her parents and friends? Therefore, Prabhupada says, I'm saying this because someone just sent me a police report about this. Somewhere in Lucknow, I think, one big police guy, he's warning people, watch out for your daughters, this is going on. So the ocean of material suffering is filled with the tears of people who are being lacerated by the threefold miseries of material existence. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has pulled us out of this ocean by his divine grace in the form of Srila Prabhupada. And he has plunged us into the ocean of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, or as we hear in the month of Kartik, what is that? Swaghosham nimajjantam akhyapayantam tadyeshitagneshu bhaktairjatattvam. When we become Krishna's devotees, he also plunges us into what? Not the ocean of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, but the Ananda Kunda. Here we have in Vrindavan so many kundas. Radha Kunda, Shyam Kunda, Govinda Kunda, ityadi. So Ananda Kunda, this is devotional service, Raj Bhakti. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, via his beloved agent, Srila Prabhupada, has picked us all out from this ocean of suffering. And we can drown. You take your pick. You can drown in the ocean or you can drown in the kunda, but both of them are a very sweet experience compared to that suffered by the poor conditioned souls. All right, I don't want to divert too much. I should continue. Krishna has come and he has descended and establishing his greatness by fulfilling his vow to protect the righteous and destroy the evil. He gave the greatest protection in the form of liberation, even to those who were devoured by the crocodile of material life, to the most evil, and even to those who displayed great hatred towards him, like Putana. On the pretext of relieving the earth of its burden of suffering, he came. And in order to deliver those conditioned souls afflicted by lamentation and illusion arising from bondage and anadi agyan, in order to uphold the glories sung by the sages who have written so many scriptures, and in order to deliver us after his disappearance from this world, the Lord singled out Arjuna, his dear friend, who was afflicted by lamentation and illusion at the commencement of the war, by the Lord's own desire to fulfill these purposes. And he manifested to Arjun the highest goal for all humanity, making it most real and attainable. We know it's real. We've experienced it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here tonight. And we know it's attainable because we've just heard how simple Krishna makes it. 4 things only we have to do. So easy. And we get this only in Bhagavad-Gita. With 18 chapters and 18 different kinds of knowledge, ornamented with the jewels of the ultimate import of the Vedas, and composed of 3 subjects. Then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur continues. The first 6 chapters of the Gita presents Nishkama Karma Yoga. Through the second 6 chapters, he presents Bhakti Yoga. And through the third 6 chapters, he presents Jnana Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is placed in between the other 2 because of its confidential nature, because of its superiority, by which it gives life to the other 2, and because of its being the most rare. If a rare jewel, you keep it very carefully protected. Because these 2 are rendered useless without bhakti, that is to say, karma and jnana are rendered useless without bhakti, only by being mixed with bhakti do they become acceptable. But there are 2 types of bhakti. There's kevala bhakti, which means pure devotional service, and pradhani bhuta bhakti, which means mainly bhakti, but also some other things too. So the first one, kevala bhakti, pure devotion, that is independent, and that's the strongest thing. Without the mixture of any karma or jnana, it's pure and strong, devoid of all material attachment. It's known by such terms as ananya bhakti, etc., etc. The second type may be mixed with karma and jnana, but this will all be described later. In chapter 2, he says, after destroying the darkness of bewilderment and lamentation of Arjun by distinguishing the body from the soul, that's always the solution, isn't it? If you think about it, whenever you get bewildered, whenever you get overwhelmed, don't we get overwhelmed sometimes? Whether by things such as lust and anger and greed, or whether just by bewilderment in general. we become so overwhelmed. And it's always because we forget this very simple thing. My friend, you are not this material body. You have an eternal identity that you're neglecting. Why double click on this thing every day? Why not wake it up if you use a Mac? So Krishna speaks about the characteristics of the liberated soul also. That's the what is that called? Sthita prajna at the end of chapter 2. So having presented very clearly karma and gyan, and indirectly bhakti, that chapter is called the Sutra of the Gita, chapter 2, because it's so important. What are some of the things that we learn in chapter 2? In addition to learning that you're not in your material body, what do you have to know? What is that verse? Nabhavo, Prabhuji, you know this verse? Just now it's escaping me.
I'm trying to
Nasate vidite bhavo, ubayor api,
Tattvadarshi. Yes.
yes. The nature of reality is that it lasts forever. And the nature of illusion is that it doesn't last. This is true both relatively and absolutely. It's relatively true in this material world. If something withstands the test of time or even geography, if it has appeal beyond borders, and if it has a lasting appeal as well, that thing is considered to be superior. That's why we call these things classical. But in absolute terms, if it is eternal, then it's real. And if it is not eternal, ultimately it's false, even if it's highly respected in this world. That's such an important fundamental foundation. Fundament means foundation. Adhara. So these instructions are given in chapter 2. In the 3rd chapter, action offered to the Lord without personal desire is described. Discrimination with a desire to conquer over lust and anger is shown. The chapter chiefly speaks about Nishkama karma as a sadhana and tells of its goal. What is the goal of Nishkama karma? Gyan. In a secondary way, this is also mentioned. So the general process for the sanishta bhaktas, or the neophyte devotees, is to go through karma and then jnana and then finally realize and appreciate and embrace bhakti. But that takes a long time. But these things are given. They're discussed. In the 4th chapter, the Lord speaks of the reasons for his appearance, the eternal nature of his appearance and activities. And he also speaks of the excellence of Gyan in such things as Brahma Yajna. He praises Jnana Yoga, Imam Yogam. The goal of Nishkam Karma is Gyan. And he speaks of various means of liberation. In general, he's praising Gyan. But the means to that Gyan is Dharma. Why Dharma? Because when we hear the word karma in this context, we have to understand we're not talking about papa, we're talking about punya. Papa is also activity. But that kind of activity will not elevate you to Gyan. It will submerge you in Agyan. If you want to be elevated to real Gyan, you have to engage in pious activity. Therefore, a person has to become punyatma hona chahiye. A person has to become pious. That's very important. I would go so far as to safely assume that this is the reason that Srila Prabhupada considered Varnashram Dharma to be the remaining 50% of his mission for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, because you're not going to get off the ground, my friend, in terms of spiritual realization without being pious. Yesham twantagatam papam, but we're not there yet, so let us continue. So having spoken of the means of liberation, Gyan is praised, but the means to Gyan is, of course, karma. That has been pointed out in chapter 4. Chapter 5. Since Krishna speaks of karma as superior to Gyan now, even though Gyan is the goal of karma, but you don't stop action once you get knowledge. You begin acting properly once you have knowledge. That is the idea in this chapter. So in that sense, jnana and karma, they're said to be equivalent here. So chapter 5 also says that the jnani and the yogi, by Nishkam karma yoga, realizing both Atma and Paramatma, attain liberation. In chapter 6, the method of controlling the fickle mind achieved by the yogi who has controlled his senses through the process of Ashtanga yoga is described. And regarding the final verse of chapter 6, what is that verse? Yogi nam api sarvesham madgate antaratmana shraddhavan padate yomam sa me yuktatama mataha. Krishna says, I consider the best of them, the best of the yogis, that person who is worshiping me with deep and transcendental faith. So this verse is a concise statement of bhakti, which is about to be defined. This is, remember, at the end of chapter 6. Chapter 6 is the lid, the top of the lid, you can say, of the jewel box. We've opened it now. And we're beginning to see the radiance of the jewels that will be delineated from chapters 7 through 12. Therefore, this verse, Yogi Nam Api Sarvesham, this is a very important verse. It is the concise statement of bhakti, which is going to be defined next. It's the thread-like ornament on the neck of the devotees. The first chapter is a summary of the Gita. Second, third, and fourth chapters deal with Nishkam karma. The fifth deals with knowledge, and the sixth deals with Ashtanga yoga, meditation, because the goal of knowledge is to fix your mind on God. But the main topic of the first 6 chapters is karma yoga. Chapter 7, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur prays, when will I take shelter of the feet of Mahaprabhu, which are a sweet ocean of mercy made of eternal bliss? Then, somehow or other, I will attain nectar of prema through the path of bhakti, which shuns liberation. In case somebody got the wrong idea at the end of chapter 6 about liberation and Gyan, he includes this verse to open chapter 7. The 7th chapter describes the powers of Krishna, the powers of he who is most worthy of worship. The 4 types of persons who worship him and who do not worship him, they're also described. And then again, he reiterates, he does a lot of repetition of this idea. In the first 6 chapters of the Gita, Jnana and Ashtanga yoga, which lead to liberation, and depend upon Nishkama karma yoga, which first purifies the heart, have been described. In the middle 6 chapters, 2 types of bhakti will be described, that bhakti which yields to salokya and other kinds of liberation by being either without desire or with desire, because of a mixture of karma, jnana, or other elements. And the main type of bhakti, which yields liberation in the form of becoming an associate of the Lord with prema, which is independent of karma, jnana, and other processes, and which, in addition, independently yields all goals, such as svarga. In the 8th chapter, the Lord speaks about pure bhakti, while describing Yoga Mishra Bhakti in reply to Arjun's questions. He also describes the 2 destinations of the yogis. That's chapter 8. At the end of the previous chapter, the Lord mentioned knowledge of the 7 items, Brahman, Adhyatma, Karma, Adhibhuta, Adhidaiva, Adhyagnya, and Krishna. Arjun asks about those things in the beginning of chapter 8. So the superiority of the devotees has been previously stated, but in chapter 8, the supreme position of Ananya Bhakti, of the Ananya Bhakta among all the devotees, has been hinted. In chapter 9, the majestic aspect of the Lord is as the object of worship, suitable for his servants, and the excellence of that pure devotee are clearly described. Bhakti is superior to karma, jnana, yoga, and other processes. As was described in chapter 7, such bhakti is either pradhani bhuta or kevala. Anybody remember what that meant? Pradhani bhuta means mixed devotion, and kevala means pure devotion. These are Prabhupada's terms. So among the types of bhakti, the supreme position of pure bhakti which is extremely powerful, not dependent on the purity or heart or other elements like Gyan, has been clearly shown. The 9th chapter begins to speak about the powers of the Lord required as knowledge in performing that pure bhakti. We have to know Krishna's greatness. Krishna says, those who know my greatness, they engage in pure devotional service. He says this very clearly. So the Gita is the essence of all scriptures, and the essence of the Gita is the middle 6 chapters. The middle of those 6 chapters, the 9th and 10th chapters, is the further essence of the 6. So it's the crème de la crème, we can say. In 3 verses, the Lord praises what he will be describing in the chapter. Gyan, which gives liberation, is described in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th chapters, is called Guhya. The knowledge which is revealed in the 7th and 8th chapter, which is suitable for attainment of Krishna, knowledge that is actually knowledge of Bhagavan, knowledge of Bhakti, that's called Guhyatara, more secret. And in chapter 9, Krishna gives knowledge of Shuddha Bhakti, which is Guhyatama. Or as we sometimes say, Rajaguhyam, etc. So, regarding the final verse of chapter 9, which we've already quoted, Manmanabhava Madbhakta, the Lord concludes by describing the method of worship. So simple. Enough said. Having absorbed your body and mind in me, Atmanam Yukta, you will certainly come to me. This is the essence. So this is the supreme position of pure bhakti, the topmost secret, which has the ability to judge who is qualified and who's unqualified. And by its contact, it purifies all persons. That's been described in chapter 9. Starting from the 7th chapter, Krishna spoke of bhakti and its exclusive nature, revealing the power of the Lord. Now in the 10th chapter, he speaks about bhakti along with the description of the vibhutis, or the representative potencies of the Lord. By knowing these, one understands why Krishna is great, why he's worthy of worship. Now the Lord will explain these in further detail throughout chapter 10 for the pleasure of those who already have devotion. Everything in this universe is Krishna only, and thus he's worthy of service. By one's intelligence, given by that realization, one should taste his sweetness. This has been explained in chapter 10. Etam vibhutim yogam cha mayo veti tatvataha ityadi. No, that's what I'm thinking of is yad yad vibhuti mat sattvam srimad urjita mevava tat tat eva vaganchatvam mamate jongsha sambhavam. Whenever you see anything that is wonderful or glorious or mighty, Krishna says, you should know for sure that's nothing for me. That's just a spark of my splendor. This is the idea. Now in the 11th chapter, Arjun praises the universal form, but when Krishna shows himself again, Arjun becomes pleased. Having heard in the end of chapter 10 that just one amsha of Krishna, the Adi Purusha, is the shelter of all vibhutis, Arjun became submerged in the highest bliss, and he wanted to see that form. And so he asked Krishna to show him that form, and so Krishna did so. Now, in the final verse of chapter 11, text number 55,
Mat karma karan mat parama mat bhakta sangavad nirvaira sarvabhutesh smamedi
give
pandav.
us a translation. Well,
After I will
Mad karma krin mad padamo mad bhakta sangha varjitaha nirvaira sarvabhuteshu yah sa mam edi pandava. Somebody who is not envious, somebody who is disassociated from materialistic people and things, and someone who is not envious of all living beings, who is a devotee, and who is engaged in pure devotional service. This person can come to me. So the Lord speaks about the general characteristics of different types of devotees, which were described starting in the 7th chapter, but Sangha Varjita means devoid of material attachment. That's a very important point. Arjun understood that his victory on the battlefield was dependent on the great power of Krishna alone. And therefore he saw that power before him in chapter 11. That is the importance. Many things we can say about that, but the time is less. In chapter 12, it's most explicit, bhakti yoga. The superiority of all types of devotees to the jnanis is described. But among the devotees, those who are endowed with wonderful qualities, like lack of hatred, are praised. Arjun heard of the great superiority of bhakti at the beginning, when he heard yogi nama sarvesham, end of chapter 6, we've described already. So now the astonishing qualities of bhakti, which is supreme and blissful, and which can be practiced by everyone, and is easy to perform, it's been explained. I was just reading this the other day, chapter 12. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says all kinds of devotees, Baladevi Dabhushan, says all kinds of devotees, they can display these wonderful qualities which endear them to Krishna. The qualities in the end of chapter 12, Advaishta, Sarvabhutanam Maitra, Karuna Evacha, Ityadi. We should go through that, the last, say, 5 or 6 verses, 8 verses actually, of chapter 12, and just meditate on that and just consider that these are the things that we want to cultivate if we want to endear ourselves to Krishna. Krishna has given us open book tests. He's told us very clearly, I like you if you have these qualities. So we have to consider that and do what we can to develop them. Gyan is like neem juice. Anybody drinks juice from a neem tree? But bhakti is like grape juice. Still, both processes, they're healthy. They will benefit you. This is the idea. Now in chapter 13, we're getting late, so we'll finish up quickly. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur begins the final third of the base of this jewel box of bhakti, if you will. He says, let me offer my respects unto the Lord's bhakti, which by its mercy resides within Gyan and other processes to a small degree, in order to bring about success in those processes. In other words, Narad Muni says this also in his Bhakti Sutras. Karma and Gyan have no value except that they contain some degree of bhakti. That is why they're valuable. The active ingredient, if you will, of these other processes is only the bhakti that they contain. But it's too minuscule to really bring one all the way back to Godhead. So bhakti is required, pure devotion. So in the last 6 chapters of the Gita, Gyan mixed with bhakti is delineated. Within these 6 chapters, Kevala bhakti is also shown to be supreme. In the 13th chapter, the body where the jiva and paramatma reside, the practice of Gyan, the jiva, and prakriti are described. In the middle 6 chapters, it was mentioned that by Kevala bhakti one attains the Lord, Bhagavan Shri Krishna. And 3 other methods of worship, starting with those who worship themselves, were also described. Liberation due to Gyan mixed with bhakti arising from Nishkama karma yoga and the process of Gyan were briefly described in the first 6 chapters. The third 6 chapters now commence to explain this Gyan in detail by examining the field, the knower of the field, and other subjects. That kshetrajna chapi mam viti sarva kshetreshu bharata ityadi. Those who know the difference between the knowers of the field, the jiva and the paramatma, along with the field itself, and also understand the method of liberation from prakriti for the living entities, methods such as meditation, they achieve the supreme goal. But among the knowers of the field, the jiva enjoying the qualities of the field is bound up, but is also liberated by knowledge. That's the important lesson of this chapter 13. And chapter 14, which, by the way, Srila Prabhupada said was the most important chapter of Bhagavad-Gita. Would you have guessed that? Prabhupada said chapter 14 is the most important chapter. Why? Because we're all dealing with the modes. This is explicit in that chapter. Krishna says very clearly, nobody's not affected by these. The modes permeate everything you do, everything you think, everything you are. We have to understand these three modes of material nature in order to become freed from their influence. Otherwise, we'll be clueless. So the bondage caused by the gunas and the symptoms of that bondage are described in chapter 14. The many symptoms of the disappearance of the gunas, the cause of disappearance, bhakti, is also described. The chapter 13 described that contact of the jiva with the body made of gunas is the cause of his taking repeated births. Anybody know that verse? Karanam guna sangosya sad asad yoni janma. Ah. The other day I had to go to Agra to visit the hospital. And the hospital had a cloudy fish tank in the lobby for the entertainment of the patients who were visiting. Cloudy because it was an Indian aquarium. Cloudy water. They looked like they hadn't changed in several years. So I saw several fish in this aquarium. And I was just looking at them and thinking about what we've heard about this subject matter in Bhagavad-Gita. Karanam guna sangosya sad asad yoni janmasu. They have got asad yoni, very inauspicious, ignorant birth. So I'm looking at these fish, and the fish are looking at me. And I could see this fish is a person just like me, but he's been reduced to this existence in a dirty fish tank in Agra, in a hospital full of marizon. So we can go there if we're not careful. This is the point of studying chapter 14. All it requires is that you associate with the wrong modes, and that's where you're going, my friend. We hear it again in chapter 17. Urvam gachanti sattvastha, madhye tishtanti rajasaha, and adho gachanti tamasaha. I think you can understand simple Sanskrit. So, what types of results come from contact with each guna? What are the symptoms of those associated with the gunas? How is one liberated from the gunas? In anticipation of these questions, the Lord promises to speak about these above topics. So the chapter 14 explains the misfortune in being bound by the gunas and the satisfaction of being freed from the gunas, which is produced by bhakti alone. Anybody know that verse? Mam chayovya bhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samati jaitan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. We become liberated by bhakti, which transcends the modes. In chapter 15, detachment is the cause of cessation of birth, death, old age, and disease. The soul is an amsha of the Lord. We have to know this. We have to know that we are superior to matter. Krishna is also superior to matter. The second to the last verse of the last chapter stated that by bhakti yoga one attains the status of Brahman. We've already quoted that verse of Mam Shayova Bicharina. So the question may be asked, okay, how does a person attain Brahman by bhakti? This is the idea. And Krishna answers, that's true. I am in human form, but I am the basis of Brahman, the supreme shelter of Brahman. Brahmano hi pratishtaham. This statement, which functions as a sutra, forms the beginning of chapter 15. So, the Lord speaks. Using a metaphor, he says this material world, this is we're on chapter 15 now, he says this material world is like a banyan tree. And you can't hope to untangle the roots or even trace out the roots on a banyan tree. Anyone who's been to Kolkata, you may have seen the botanical garden there has a banyan tree that is 2 miles thick. 2 miles. Nobody can figure out. It's one tree. You can no way to figure it out. So what does he suggest we do instead? Slash. Just get your machete and cut your way through this entanglement. The material world is a complicated place. It's like this banyan tree. So in this way, and Krishna is above this. Krishna is above both the akshara and the kshara, the fallible and infallible living entities. This knowledge has been explained in chapter 15. Now in the 16th chapter, divine and demoniac qualities as well as their results are explained. Some of them cause liberation, some cause bondage. And Krishna mentions three qualities that we may become infected with by dint of associating with the modes. These will take us to hell. What are those three? Lust, anger, and greed.
Greed.
These are the three enemies, the gates of hell, Krishna says. So, those who don't follow scriptural injunctions, they practically don't have a choice but to be infected by these modes of material nature and the ugly results that we get in the form of these three gates to hell. So the injunctions of scripture, we think that to follow strictly things makes life difficult. It is difficult. That's no denying that. It's not easy. But it's a lot easier than the difficulties that ensue from being thoroughly infected by the modes of material nature and by developing demoniac qualities as a result of affection for those modes. So this is the great mercy of chapter 16. Krishna has put it very clearly for us. Tasmat chastram pramanam te karya vijanataha. You should know what to do and what not to do. And how do you know? On the basis of scripture. Yashastra vidamutsrijya vartate kamakarataha nasasiddhim avapnoti nasukham naparamgatim. If you whimsically try to do something independently of what the scripture enjoins, you're not going to get the supreme destination for sure. You're not even going to become happy. So this is the lesson of chapter 16. Now, Arjuna's curiosity is piqued by this statement, very clear statement. And so he asks, what about people who are worshiping God, but they're not following scripture? What about them? What is their position? And so Krishna explains the different kinds of, our faith can be infected by the three modes of material nature. This is all extending from chapter 14. Now may be getting clear why Srila Prabhupada said chapter 14 is so important. We're still talking about these three modes here in chapter 17, almost at the end. And Krishna goes into great detail about this, not only here in chapter 17, but in chapter 18 as well. How these modes infect everything, including our faith. Do you have sattvic faith? Or is your faith rajasic? Maybe your faith is tamasic. Do you know? You better know. You have to know. Otherwise, where are you going? You don't know. Tamasi ma jyotirgamaya, the Shruti mantra enjoins. This is we're born in this ignorant state, a bodha jata, and we should not stay there. Our responsibility as human beings is to learn what is our situation, what can we do about our situation, how do we do that, how do we get the inspiration. All this information is given here in Bhagavad-Gita. So Arjun is asking, what is the basis or the nishtha, the faith, as it were, of those who give up scripture but still perform some kind of worship, some kind of yajna dana or tapa, etc.? What is it? What is their position? And Krishna says very clearly, they can be in any of these three modes. And we see that. Tamasic faith is very prevalent in the world today, and so is rajasic faith. Tamasic faith means, let me fill a jetliner with airline fuel and fly it into a skyscraper building for God. That is tamoguna. Rajasic faith means I'm going to give the biggest donation among my community and everybody's going to know it, and I'm going to ensure that. They're going to put my name on the wall. There's going to be a stone plaque, and everyone's going to know how great I am. This is Rajasic faith. Sattvic faith means this is what the Shastra says, no questions asked. I'm going to do it, period. I'm not going to be mental about it. It's done. This is the great benediction, I want to say, or advantage, maybe is a better word for it, of being born in traditional Indian culture, by which I mean Paramparagata Bharatiya Sanskriti, good families. This is how we're trained, not to be mental and just to do the right thing. So this is all described in chapter 17. It describes how sattvic actions of various types performed with faith will lead us to liberation. Now, when we come to chapter 18, Arjun has another question. I'm ready to follow your orders. That's my duty. So tell me though, what is sannyas and what is tyag and jnana and karma, defining liberation, all these things. The chapter 18, these things are discussed in further detail. And finally, he comes to the point, and after hearing all these things, like chapter 18, text 63 through 66, which we've already quoted. Again, Krishna comes back to the same point that he mentioned in the essence of the Gita, chapter 9. Manmana bhava madbhakto sarva dharman parityaja ityadi, these quotes. So finally Arjun says, Karishye vachanam tava. Okay, I'm ready. I understand everything now. I've made my choice. I'm going to surrender to you. So, and I'm not going to worry about anything else. I'm going to, or rather, another better way of saying that is I'm going to worry about everything, but for your sake, not mine. That's the better way to put it. We actually don't give up our varnas and ashrams and our practices. We don't actually give them up, but we perform them for Krishna's pleasure instead of our own or someone else's. So Krishna tells Arjun, my dear friend Arjun, I have some remaining work to do in relieving the burden of the earth. Remember the burden of the earth we discussed in the beginning? All those tears. Think of the fish in Agra and the people who are suffering in North Korea right now, or people who are being persecuted on account of their political ideology or their faith, or people who are being drowned in the Mediterranean Sea, trying to get a better life in Europe. So many people who are getting Omicron and so many other diseases that are let out by the CCP. So this is all suffering. And Krishna, ultimately it comes down to Krishna. Who else is going to deal with it but Krishna? But the devotees who love Krishna, they take upon themselves voluntarily the responsibility of the Lord. They share in the Lord's mission of relieving that burden. And here Krishna says to Arjun, I want you to do that work. And when the Lord said that to Arjun, Arjun took up his Gandiva bow in his hand and he rose to fight. And he won the war. Even having so many less soldiers, but by Krishna's grace. Why? Because Krishna says, well, not Krishna says, Sanjaya said, Yatra Yogeshwaro Krishna, Yatra Partho Dhrunataraha, Tatra Shrir Vijayo Bhutir Dhruva Nitir Mama. Wherever you have this devotion to Krishna, you're going to have all victory, all morality, all everything. Now, as far as Arjuna knew what Krishna told him. What did Krishna tell him? Mat chitta mas sarva durgani mat prasadat trishyasi. Ata chetvam ahankarat nashrosyasi vinamshyasi. If you surrender unto me, Arjuna, then, and be conscious of me, following my orders, then you'll pass over every obstacle by my grace, not by your potency, by my grace. And on the other hand, if you choose not to do that, you do have that choice. Remember, it's not robotics. But if you choose not to do that, then I'm sorry to say that you're going to be finished. You will be finished. Struggling on the basis of our own strength or our own prarabdha karma, we will get only as far as our prarabdha karma allows us. But when we struggle on behalf of Krishna and under his guidance, either direct or indirect, then we are always successful, just as Sanjaya has promised in the concluding verse. Now, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he did not finish his commentary, or rather he finished it, but the last 5 verses of his commentary on the Bhagavad-Gita, he says, were taken away by the carrier of Ganesh. That means a rat took away his manuscript, and he didn't bother to write them again. But we've heard enough from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur that we can do something. And if we haven't heard, or we're not satiated by what we've heard, we can study that commentary on our own. But Srila Prabhupada, in his Bhagavad Gita as it is, he really does include the essence of whatever his predecessors have said, especially Baladev. Baladev is the disciple of Baladev Vidyabhushan, is the disciple of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and Prabhupada's commentary especially follows his. So, but we get this blessing from our predecessor Acharya that may the shower of meanings of the essence of scripture, which give benefit to the whole world, delight the devotee chatak birds with its sweetness, and may the pleasure they derive from it light up my heart. A chatak bird, even in the hottest part of May in Vrindavan, they will not take water from any pond or from any river. They wait for the rain to come, and in the sky they grab the rainwater. They only want pure distilled water. They don't want bottled water or anything else. So that's why he says the devotees are like the chatak birds, because the devotees will not touch anything cooked by a non-devotee. They will not hear anything uttered by the impersonalists. They will not do anything that's not related to Krishna consciousness. They will not associate with anyone who's not a devotee. These are chatak birds. So he's giving the benediction that this sarartha varshini, this rainfall of essential meaning from the Bhagavad Gita, will delight these devotee chataka birds, the pure devotees, in other words. And the pleasure that they derive will light up his heart. He's praying like that. So in this way, he ends his commentary for the pleasure of the devotees' hearts by the mercy of his predecessors. And we receive this in just a succession from ours. All right, so I think our time is way over time now, sorry. So maybe we have a few moments left for some questions, if anybody has any questions.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much for wonderfully detailing out for each chapter by chapter. So 2 questions comes out from the hearing. I think one is about the surrender you were talking about. In that surrender, you can give more details, and the 8, especially on the basis of 18 culture of knowledge, which you mentioned, and Sri Prabhupada talks about in the 13th chapter, 8 to 12th verse, an important aspect. A second thing also you mentioned, there is varieties of knowledge as culture and social, economical, and any important 1 or 2 aspects we can take and improve ourselves.
Okay, yeah. Well, let's consider, let's go back to the very beginning. What are some of Arjuna's concerns in chapters 1 and 2? Arjun basically had 4 things that he was worried about. He had compassion. He didn't want to kill those. He didn't want to make people suffer. He didn't want to kill his friends and relatives. And he didn't want to be the cause of suffering for those friends and relatives, own relatives. So compassion was a concern that he expressed to Lord Krishna. And he also didn't think that he would really enjoy a victory at the expense of the lives of these soldiers that he actually respected and had affection for. So he was concerned about who would really enjoy the spoils of this war. And another doubt that he had was that it was sinful to kill so many persons for one's own self-aggrandizement. And what would happen? The fourth thing he said is that the eternal Sanatana Dharmas, the Kula Dharmas also, that are coming since time immemorial, these would all be disrupted if so many Kshatriyas were killed. Because if we look at the Dharma Shastras, we will find instruction is given to the Brahmanas primarily. Secondarily, some instruction is also given to the Kshatriyas. When we find a description about the Vaishyas, duties, for example, or the Shudras, there's not very much instruction given at all. This is consistent throughout all the Shastras. If you don't believe me, you can look in Bhagavad-Gita and see that Krishna outlines one verse describes the duties of the Brahmanas, for example, another one for the Kshatriyas. The Vaishyas get only half a verse, and the Shudras only get the other half of the verse. And the same pattern holds true in Canto 7, Chapter 15. Well, it's actually several chapters in Canto 7, when Narad Muni is instructing Yudhishthira Maharaj and others about Dharma in general, Varnashram Dharma in particular. I'm mentioning this because it is a concern. It's one of Arjuna's major concerns, and it was one of Srila Prabhupada's concerns also. So what I have to comment about that is that Krishna nowhere in Bhagavad-Gita invalidates Arjuna's concern with Sanatana Dharma. I'm taking the last of his concerns and focusing on that because it's the most productive for all of us in ISKCON. And Krishna kind of sidesteps the issue, but he does not ever at any point tell Arjuna that his whole concern is wrong. His approach was wrong. What was his approach? We already mentioned. Arjuna was trying to figure out how to make everybody happy, or to even to make himself happy. It was selfish concern. This was not really Arjuna's character, but as we've heard already, Krishna put Arjuna into this kind of illusion. He was acting like one of us. This is the way that we act, and this is the way that we think. The mother-in-law will teach the daughter-in-law by teaching the daughter, and similarly, Krishna is teaching the rest of us by placing Arjuna into this sullied consciousness that we know so well through our own experience. So Krishna does not really discourage Arjuna from those noble concerns, the concerns that deal with dharma and avoiding sinful activity and compassion even. But he does elevate the discussion such that those concerns are transcended. But at the end of the day, it's not like Krishna accepted Arjuna's ideal solution that he should not fight. Rather, at the end of the discussion, Arjuna picked up his Gandiva bow and he was prepared to fight because that is what Krishna wanted him to do. In other words, he did his duty. His duty was not something to be neglected or surrendered or transcended. It was to be maintained and to be performed, but without mundane consciousness. This is the point. Otherwise, there's no meaning to what chapter 4 tells us about why Krishna descends. paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chatushkritam dharma samstharpanapanam. Dharma samsthapanam. These are the reasons that Krishna comes to this world. These are social, and they border on the political as well. They're important. This is the point. Cultural also. Religious also. These things are all important. They're all very essential, defining characteristics of human beings. They cannot be just rejected outright or totally. They have to be engaged in devotional service. Think about this. How do we define devotional service? How does Rupa Goswami define devotional service? In his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he gives the classic definition. Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadi anavritam. That pure devotional service has no admixture of karma or jnana. We've been discussing, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has been discussing, how in the Bhagavad-Gita these things are addressed, they're acknowledged, but they're not encouraged necessarily. And Rupa Goswami, he outright rejects. Well, at least he says in terms of, if we're looking at Kevala Bhakti, what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur calls Kevala Bhakti or pure devotional service, it does actually reject karma and jnana. But can you really do that? Can you stop activity? Can you stop thinking? Jnana doesn't actually mean knowledge, although we translate it in that way for convenience sake. Jnana actually means awareness. Do you want to eliminate awareness? Karma means activity. We've described already in this context, it means pious activity, following Shastra conjunctions. That's really what karma means. In other words, it's dharma. But in its broadest sense, karma means all activity. And can you get rid of all activity? No, you cannot. So we're in a quandary now. We're supposed to perform devotional service without either karma or jnana. What are we supposed to do? We have no option. We have to embrace karma and jnana, but we have to accept them only in terms of the instructions that are given in the Shastras, given by our predecessors, and especially arbitrated by our spiritual master, bona fide spiritual masters. Then it becomes divya karma, or divya gyan. Divya gyan hriday prakashita janma karma chame divyam, Krishna says. He qualifies it in the same section of chapter 4. So these are some of these the political, cultural, religious, social facets of the personal experience of Arjun and all the others who were on that battlefield. They all had to deal with this somehow or other. And in particular, dharma has to be maintained. Otherwise, dharmasya hina pashubhisamana. Without dharma, we're no longer human beings. We're called dvipada pashus. Humanity is not biologically defined. It's defined in terms of adherence to dharma. Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam. This is what the Lord comes here to establish. So without that, we're not humans. And without being human beings, we cannot really take to pure devotional service either. Animals, generally, I mean, there are always exceptions, and anything is possible by Krishna's mercy, but in general, animals and rakshasas and demons and other lower species, and even higher species, actually, devas also have a hard time with pure Krishna consciousness. But when we're human beings, we can cultivate Krishna consciousness. So let's make sure that we're human beings. These are some of the implications. They're not explicit in the text, but they're clearly there in the beginning chapters of the Bhagavad-Gita, and they are not at any point in any of the following 17 chapters, they're not at any point invalidated. in the chapter 18, for example, this is the conclusion, when Arjun is asking Krishna in particular about tyaga and renunciation, because there are some who would encourage us to just give everything up. Krishna goes into great detail to define what these mean, and the acharyas commenting on that, say first 6-7 verses of chapter 18, they also make it clear that natyajyam, this one's prescribed duty is to never be eliminated. So what does it mean? Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. It is a change in consciousness, especially if your spiritual master has ordered you to perform your dharma. Then you have to do it, because the order of the spiritual master is never external. It's never extrinsic to bhakti. In the Ramananda Samvad, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was presented with that verse, Varnashrama Charavata, ityadi. And Ramananda Rai presented that verse as the goal of life, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Eto Bahya, this is external. He didn't say it's rejected. He said it's external. But a lot of things are external. Eating is also external. You stop eating? Sleeping, eating, sleeping, mating, defending. As long as we're doing these things, we have to do so in terms of Shastra conjunctions. Otherwise, we forfeit our humanity. And having done that, there's hardly a chance to become Krishna conscious. So it's very important. These are some lessons that we can gain there, as I said, in the beginning, and also still at the end of the Bhagavad-Gita, they're still there, valid lessons. That's one example. Maybe you had something else in mind. If so, please elaborate.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Amritanand Prabhu has a question.
Okay.
Go ahead. Amrit.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you for sharing your realizations and your experiences. Prabhu, I have 2 questions, if time permits. The first one is, you mentioned that Krishna likes people who do a certain set of things, are rules, do's and don'ts. Now, what I understand is Krishna is the ultimate person. Now, this thing of transactional relationship is more specific to us in our conditioned state. If you do this, I'll do that in return for you. So how is it that Krishna, who is all perfect, would expect our behavior and actions, so to say, to fall in line with what he likes or he doesn't like?
That's a good question. What I said actually was that Krishna likes devotees who have certain qualities, and I was saying that in the context of the final verses of chapter 12. Qualities such as to be kind to others, to be the friend to all living beings, you can go through the list yourself. When we develop those qualities, that endears us to Krishna. That's one thing. Another thing I also said, but in the context of chapter 16, is that we cannot be happy and we cannot achieve the supreme destination, and we cannot Yashasra vidham utsrajya varjate kama karata nasa siddhim avapnoti nasukham na paramgatim. We cannot get perfection if we're trying to do so outside of the grammatical framework, if you will, of the Shastra conjunctions.
Mm-hmm.
So that this is not necessarily a kind of a negotiation or a conditional business exchange of any sort, because Krishna is actually not insisting that we follow those things. But he does say that you're not going to be happy unless you follow them. We can experience this in our life practically. When we try to do anything without the blessings of superior personalities, we cannot be happy, period. And neither we can be successful, and there's no question of going back to God also. So it's not necessarily it's not comparable to the kinds of conditional negotiations that we have between conditioned souls. It's not like that at all.
So
Krishna's
Krishna
not
is
going to lose anything. If we decide not to surrender, it's no problem for him.
Yeah.
But we suffer, and that hurts him. In that sense, it's a problem for him only. Is it
Got
clear?
it. Yes,
Yeah.
very clear. Thanks, Prabhu. And my second question is more on a practice of Krishna consciousness, especially for grahasthis. Prabhu, you gave the example of the Chataka bird who will not take anything but the rainwater, no matter how thirsty he is. But when it comes to associating, we try to associate with devotees. Frankly, in a week, that association happens less often than what we have to associate with non-devotees at your workplace, your family, and so on and so forth. So to give you an example, on a family occasion, they may cook something, which of course you won't eat meat, but it would have something like not offered. Then if we do not partake in those celebrations, we are either labeled as fanatics or, it's kind of insular. So how do we adjust this? How do we manage this?
Very tactfully.
Okay.
Very difficult. I know. I've been there. I used to go to office. We had our team meetings all the time, and somebody has to bring refreshments, and why does this guy always bring things and he only eats when he brings it? It's a tough situation. It's very difficult. You have to do the best you can, and pray to Krishna for guidance. You can ask senior devotees for guidance. These things are by their very nature very detail oriented, so it's going to be context specific, I mean to say. And the more details involved, the more you have to discuss with those who are local and understand the situation. I can give general advice, but the general advice that I can give is that you have to be very careful. Household life is, by its very constitution, a compromise. Frankly, we have to admit, we are in the household ashram primarily because we have material desires. And that is antithetical to Krishna consciousness, and we know this. But we're trying to work on it, and so therefore it's like having your foot in one foot on land and one foot in a boat. It's a little bit awkward, you see. So but we have to work on it, and we pray for guidance, and by following the process of Krishna consciousness in all seriousness and sincerity, then Krishna will guide us. This is the point that I mentioned in the end. Mat chitta sarva durgani mat prasada tirishyasi. You will overcome all problems by my grace. Krishna promises that. But we have to be serious and sincere. If you invest your time, it is a good investment to invest your time in studying the many letters that Srila Prabhupada wrote to his various disciples, and conversations also. You will see, especially in the letters, that practically at the end of every single letter that Prabhupada wrote to anyone, he would always say, be very serious and sincere, follow the regulative principles, chant your 16 rounds without offense, follow the morning and evening program. These are the basic things. If we do these things, then Krishna's assistance is guaranteed, and we will advance. That's what it means to take shelter of Krishna, such that we become matchitta, as he describes in chapter 18. So that's that. And then, to take shelter of elder grahastas who are stable and deeper in their faith than we are, that is a very great boon, because they can give advice that sannyasis cannot give, or brahmacharis cannot give. Elder grahastas are an extremely undervalued resource in our movement, but there are enough of them now. We're all getting older. We don't have a choice. And hopefully by the time we get old, we've acquired some kind of experience and some kind of wisdom, and we're able to help those who are junior. So that's another thing we can do. What was I going to say? Sajati ashaya snigdhao. Two qualifications.
Yeah, sadhu sangha.
Sadhu sangha swatovare. Srila Rupa Goswami says two conditions have to be met when we're associating with devotees. To be productive and to really elevate us. The person has to be similar to us. We have to be able to relate. There has to be something in common. That's why I say associate with other grahastas. But it's not good enough just to find somebody you're comfortable with if that person's faith is no better than your own. So, swatovare, the person has to be ahead of you in terms, his faith has to be deeper than yours. The definition of a more advanced devotee is that his faith is actually much deeper than our own. That is the thing that elevates us. That's the active ingredient of sadhu sangha. Otherwise, we don't really get elevated. We're very happy all together, eating pakoras and watching the cricket match, but we don't make advancement, you see? So this is the point. When we because especially nowadays, nobody's moving around that much, we may not have the personal association of our spiritual master very much. Or maybe we can, because in the digital world, everything is a button away only. But at any rate, whatever association we find or are blessed with, we have to keep these principles in mind. That for that association to purify me, the person, I have to select someone whose faith is deeper than mine and inquire submissively from him and get guidance from him or her. And this is the process. There's more to be said about that, much more, but I'm trying to keep it brief. Is that okay?
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Yes. Okay. So if there are no more questions, even if there are more questions, I'm happy to answer.
It. Yeah. Thank you so much for giving you so much time.
Thank you all for inviting me and very patiently listening for a long time. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to all of you.
Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai.
Hare Krishna. Radhe Radhe.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.